Hi there, Ollie Anderson here. You're listening to Creative Status. Welcome to the podcast if it's the first time you found it. If you're returning, then thanks a bunch. This is a place where we talk about growing real, using the creative process as a vehicle for making the unconscious conscious so we can release whatever we need to release, integrate whatever we need to integrate, and become more of whatever it is that we are. If you don't know, I'm a transformational coach, help people to bring more realness into their lives. I wrote a book, Personal Revolutions, Short Course in Realness, and another one, Shadow Life, Freedom from Bullshit in an Unreal World. Check those out if you so desire. Today's interview is with Elizabeth DiAlto from untameyourself.com. Elizabeth is an embodiment specialist, and this is basically a conversation about wildness, untaming yourself, and moving towards your truth. Elizabeth has an awesome framework for breaking that down. We go through each stage of that in the conversation. Loads of amazing stuff in a short amount of time. So Elizabeth, thank you so much for bringing the energy. Everybody else, hope this helps you to be a little bit more wild and free. Here we go. Thanks a bunch. Boom. Oh, hi there, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Creative Status. We're going to be talking about wildness, which sounds like a very exciting topic. Before we get into it, do you feel like introducing yourself, telling people what you're all about, and also sharing what you want to get out of this conversation that we're about to have?
Sure. Back in 2013, I started to create something that I now call the School of Sacred Embodiment. At the time, I didn't know what it was. I was just kind of following my instincts and my intuition and creating things as they came to me. Wow. And 2015, I launched a podcast, which also had many iterations. The current name is Embodied with Elizabeth DiAlto, which I'm actually retiring it soon. We'll retire at 460 episodes. It feels like a little free university I created, for anyone who is interested, but mostly for myself to be able to follow my own curiosities, invite people to have conversations that I was excited to have, and I'm super proud of the show. And other than that, I've traveled a bunch around the world teaching my movement method, Wild Soul Movement, trained a bunch of people in it, and it's just, the internet's a miracle where we get to reach people and connect and discuss things and learn about things that we may not have otherwise. And I also think it's kind of a disaster area because, we're constantly overconsumed and oversaturated with information, and not all information is created equal,
So what you just said about information, does this feed into your philosophy around wildness? I think when a lot of people hear that word wild, they kind of imagine people running around, just following every animal instinct that pops up, maybe beating their chest, just screaming into the abyss or howling, whatever it is that they do. Yeah. What do you mean by wild? Because I think it's a bit deeper than the stereotype I might have just shared.
Yeah, similar to what you just described, I always say wild does not mean like barefoot, naked, screaming in the woods. It can. Yeah, that might be someone's. It sounds fun, but wild is just your true nature. So depending on who you are, how you're built, what your real true soul's desires are, or, if you're not a person that connects or relates to soul, just whatever, the most honest, real, genuine, authentic, that's another overused word, but it's still a real word that means something, part of you, that's what wild is. So the example I always like to give, for any of our real introverted friends who just love nothing more than to be at home with a book or a cup of tea, watching a show or whatever, staying in on a Friday night when people are pressuring you to go be social or do something might be wild for you because it's the most honest, it's the most natural instinct. And so there's such a range of what could be wild for each person. But the biggest thing is that it's about your true nature, and it's about living and making choices and honoring your truth, what is really honest for you, any given moment, any season or cycle of your life, because it's always changing, right? Or it could be changing, it could be flexible as you, grow and evolve throughout the course of your life.
That's amazing. So the way that I always try and simplify all the things that I talk about is basically that we just need to do two things. We need to uncover the truth and then live the truth. And the thing that causes most of the problems in our lives is a disconnection from the truth, which causes all kinds of kind of existential problems and stuff like that. And it basically boils down to an unhealthy relationship with two things, I think. the first thing is an unhealthy relationship with our own kind of bodily instincts and not having mastery over them. The other thing is kind of social programming and conditioning that makes us feel like we have to be something other than what we are. And so, it comes down to this classic thing that a lot of the healing process is just about unlearning all of the bullshit that keeps us from ourselves so we can return back to our realness, as I call it, or to just where we're supposed to be in the first place. So it seems like a lot of the problems, based on what you just said about information at the start of the conversation, are about the way that we kind of interpret life and perceive life through those interpretations, and we think that we have to be something other than whatever it is that we are. So I suppose we can look at that as we're either over-domesticated, let's say, or we're too conditioned. Is there anything more to it as you see it, or is it just those two things? Like we're too domesticated, we're too conditioned, and we just...
No, I'm really with you on that. And that's, deprogramming, deconditioning. These are words that I've also used over the years a lot. Reclaiming, having to reclaim a lot of things. But the original tagline back when I created Wild Soul Movement in 2013 was everything you've ever needed has always been inside of you. And I obviously wasn't talking about like physical, like practical world things, because, there are, of course, some people who need food and they don't have access to it, or are, underemployed or whatever, and they don't have, like the physical resources for being in the world that they need. But I'm more talking about everything you've ever needed in terms of your own wisdom, your own, gifts, talents, genius, all those things, which everyone has that stuff. It might be different for people, but everyone, even, folks who someone might judge as like, oh, that person's not very intelligent. Intelligence comes in many forms, right? Like I have a person I specifically think of in my family was not ever very like book smart, but they're so creative. They're so incredible when it comes to doing things with their hands, or even finding little solutions for things around the house that might have broken, or like a better system for, closing the garage door, or making sure, someone doesn't crash into the stuff when they pull in the garage. So people's minds, people's genius works in so many different ways, but like the overculture really kind of dictates the most preferable and the most acceptable ways. And that's really where a lot of the programming and the conditioning comes in. So when I say everything you've ever needed has always been inside of you, what I really mean is everything you've ever needed to really be you has always been there. So like you're saying, just peeling back everything that makes you think that either that's not good enough, that is not, and it might not be in line with the norms, but that doesn't make you the problem. The norms are the problem.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's those social standards that are very unreal, because they're basically just designed to help us fit into the economic system or whatever it is. And they just give us a bunch of shoulds. That's the classic way of looking at it in coaching, right? You should do this, you should do that. And then people get lost following a path that doesn't even really exist in the first place. How do people know, or I suppose, what are some of the symptoms that are going to show up in people's lives if they need to become more wild? Like, is there a way of reverse engineering, how they need to change their relationship with themselves based on some of the common things they might be dealing with, which are a product of not being wild in the way you're talking about?
So I love the way you say reverse engineering, because originally when I created Wild Soul Movement, it was a movement practice. And now there's 3 different types of practice under the original movement practice. But it was also a program, like I launched my first online program in 2014 under this business. Actually, I was doing fitness stuff before that. And that was in 2011. But I basically reverse engineered my own healing process and came up with a framework, which now I call the Wild Soul Liberation Framework, but it has 8 pillars: surrender, release, trust, receptivity, wild dreaming, desire, love, and truth. And what's cool is that after working with people in all kinds of forms, like online programs, weekend workshops, retreats, training people to teach and facilitate the movement practice and the framework, those are 8 pillars that people can they can work them in order. They can come back to them over and over, because as we kind of alluded to earlier, healing is a process that happens in layers over time, right? So I have a year-long mystical mentorship that I run, which is called Power, and we meet every other week. And, we ask, like, what which pillar are you working this week? Like, what's up for you? And it's cool to see how people who understand the full framework can just kind of bounce around like, oh, like truth is really big for me this week because I have had a conflict come up with my partner. And so I'm really learning to like honor my truth and honor their truth at the same time, even when they're not the same, right? So, which points back to, so I need to surrender and release a little bit around needing to be right or wanting them to feel or think or approach things the same way I do. So that framework has really, I mean, thousands of people all over the world have gone through that framework, used it, come back to it over and over again as like a core kind of healing process and practice for like a decade now. So that's really the best thing I have around that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So have we got time to go through those 8 pillars kind of quickly and give like the Cliff Notes version of how each one can help you to be a bit more wild? Like, I don't know if that's something you're down for, but if you are, should we just blast through them? So I called the first 3 surrender, release, and trust. So should we just do it in order? So with surrender, I suppose the question is, how does surrendering help us become more wild in this way or return to our factory settings and the natural way of being?
Yeah, so actually this is super easy to do because I could spit it out of my mouth or I could just look at several pages on my website where it has it. So arguably the most valuable benefit of surrender is handing your needs to be right and your needs to control thing. Either, if you're a more spiritually oriented person, over to the divine. And if that's not your thing, just get out of your own way, right? Especially as we navigate this like post-pandemic world where so many people's hypervigilance was peaked. And a lot of people, whether they realize it or not, the harder they cling to being right and being in control, the harder life is. So surrender helps us get out of our own way and is actually one of the best cures for self-sabotage.
Yeah. What do you think about the thing that gets thrown around a lot where we say control is an illusion? Like, my experience is that the more people are clinging to their social programming and are fragmented within themselves, the more that they end up being a bit of a control freak because they need the identity that they've created for themselves because of the social conditioning and the inner fragmentation. They need to cling to that and they try and control life so that they can keep that image in place and then avoid having the shadow self kind of reemerge when they're not ready for it and all of the underlying emotional stuff. And so that is a very big part of this puzzle, I think, where you just shared, like the control thing. But is it true that, well, I'm opening up a kind of worms here, but like, is it true, do you think, that control is an illusion?
No. So I'm always living in the nuance, right? Yes, it's yes and, right? Sometimes control is an illusion when we're trying to control things that we absolutely can't control. But what I teach people through the framework, really the whole first 4 parts, surrender, release, trust, and receptivity, which I consider like the allowing portion of the framework, is there absolutely are certain things that are in our control. The number one thing, especially once we've done some healing work, especially when there's trauma presence, because there's even a little asterisk on what I'm about to say, we can control how we react and respond to things. Exactly. We can control like whether or not we take a pause. Now, if someone's in like active trauma and, you know, their nervous system has been hijacked, that's the asterisk, right? They actually can't control how they're going to respond. If someone's like actually genuinely triggered, like the way a real trigger on the nervous system works, because people love throwing around the word trigger inaccurately these days. But if people are for real triggered, they're not going to be able to control how they react or they respond to things. But we spend most of our lives not triggered. So we have a lot of control over whether we take a pause, whether we walk away, sleep on it, you know, like, and that's one of the greatest things we can focus our like desire to control on is like our own emotional, mental responses, reactions, and communication.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that because it's so important. Because I think so many people, they become so open-minded to the surrender thing that their brains basically fall out and they don't realize that we always have control over our relationship with ourselves. Instead of reacting, we can respond in the way that you just kind of alluded to, unless we're like totally traumatized by something and then we're just going to act like on autopilot. And so, that is super important. Okay, so what about the release thing? When you talk about release, what are we releasing?
So I really think about this. Think of it as letting go with grace. And the reason I like to bring grace into the conversation is because we can release violently or we can release lovingly, right? Like sometimes when we want to let things go, we want to like burn it down, sever the ties, burn the bridges. And sometimes that's necessary, right? But a lot of the time it's really not. So, and I also need to acknowledge that it's much easier to talk about letting things go than it is to actually do it. So when I talk about release, I teach people how to identify not only what needs to be released, but what's ready to be released, which makes a world of difference because, you are in this coaching world, personal development. One of the addictions in this world, in this like industry or field is like excavating. People always want to look for the next thing. People treat themselves like fixer-uppers or projects or broken things that need to be fixed. And really, it's just like, what's the most obvious thing in your life right now that's just right in front of your face going, hey, handle me, like it's usually not. If you take a moment like to just like reflect, it's like, what's the most agitating thing? What's the thing that is like holding me back, getting in my way, like causing me the most stress, strain, distraction, right? What distracts you the most? Those things, what relationships, what people, what's the most draining? Things that are most present and like relevant, let those, like focus on those things. Don't go digging around for like, well, I think I was, a something in a past life and that's affected. Girl, like what's going on now in this life,
Wow. I've seen quite a few people fall into that trap where they just keep, like you said, excavating. They're just digging and digging and digging and digging because it's almost like they put their emotional stuff on a bit of a pedestal, and it's eventually you get to the point where you know enough or you've released enough to be able to keep moving forward or to start moving forward again. And I think there is an element within this kind of self-help culture, whatever you want to call it, where it's exactly like you said again, like people become a bit obsessed with the stuff that they're digging up and the process of digging things up, and it just keeps them in the past. And that ironically prevents them from getting where they want to go. That's amazing. Something that I always look to throw out is give me something real or GTFO. So basically, if it's not real, get rid of it. If it is real, keep focusing on it and keep moving forward.
Yeah.
Just to kind of sum up that little section about release, and I suppose it comes back to some of the stuff we said about surrender and self-control and all that kind of stuff. But this is a big question and a small question, depending on how you look at it. But how do we let go of the things that we've determined the time is right, basically? Is there a quick way to do it?
Well, the flaws in the question. The word quick, listen. Sometimes yes, right? Because sometimes things are like a big juicy pimple ready to be popped and move on, right? And you really can just look at something and be like, I'm just done with that. That is possible. Also less common, right? Like, yes, it's possible. That's not how a lot of things are. A lot of things, again, are going to have to be like peeled away at in layers over time. And I think of it like a spiral staircase, right? Like as we walk up a spiral staircase, we're going to pass the same sites over and over again, but from a different purview, right? From a different perspective. We're going to be looking at it from a different angle. And I always like to share this with people because, again, something else people will use to beat themselves up or make themselves wrong is, why am I dealing with this again? I thought I let this go. And it's like, you let go a layer of it. You might have let go some big layers, but now it's up because you're different. And now you get to respond differently than you would have before. Sometimes it's like, comes back to show you how much you have changed. Like, look how much mature you are. Look how little you are affected by this thing that used to really take you out. So we really have to be compassionate with ourselves. But the other thing that I always go into when I teach release is forgiveness work. And some people are real triggered by the word forgiveness because it reminds them of like religious upbringings, or some people think that, and not all religious upbringings are traumatic, but for some people they really are. And a lot of people think forgiveness means like letting people off the hook for crappy things they've done. And that's not what it is. Forgiveness is energy work, right? It's just taking your energy back from something that has happened. You can't change how it happened. So it's like, how are you going to relate to this thing that has happened in your life?
Yeah. That's awesome. Basically, driving your own bus. I think that's like the common way to look at it. Like just taking back your power layers. What about the trusting? So I'm going to kind of race through these a little bit, but like
that's okay.
Sorry.
Oh God, trust comes after release, because once you've practiced some surrender and release, it's easier to trust. The way I think of it is this: if you are wanting to get a new piece of furniture in your home, sometimes you got to get like if you need a new couch, you need to get rid of the old one, right? So because getting rid of the old one creates space for the new one. And so trust is then when we get to practice, what are we putting in the space that we've cleared out in surrender and release? It's been one of my favorite things to teach because, and what are we trusting, right? How are we trusting ourselves? There's three things: trusting ourselves, our life, and again, for people who are more spiritually oriented, trusting in the divine, right? And for trusting ourselves, for a lot of people, it's intuition. And so a lot of trust is mainly focused on learning, like, how does your intuition even work? How does it speak through you? You mentioned something earlier about people having unhealthy relationships with their like body signals or instincts. Trust, that's like trust 101. Like, what is your body? Your body is filled with useful information guiding you, right? So how does that work? That's like the foundation for trust.
Yeah. Like, that's what I found as well. I think when I think about trust, I think first we have to kind of look at the ego stuff, deconstruct our identity, which often means, or usually means, that we have to get out of our heads and back into our bodies and the wisdom that's stored there. When we do that, we can move on to kind of integrating the shadow. Normally, the way that I see it, there's like a dance going on between the ego and the shadow. And so if you can raise awareness of how the ego is holding you back, you can start bringing up some of the shadow stuff so you can release it or integrate if you need to. Then you can start trusting life and building with it. Because if you don't go through those stages first, which can also be described as awareness, acceptance, and then action, any action that you do take is going to be out of alignment because you're just going to be reinforcing all of your conditioning and stuff like that. But yeah, 100% it involves getting into your body. So it sounds like with the work that you do, that is like a big part of it as well now. Like you keep talking about movement work. Is that ultimately what it sounds like? You're getting back in your body, you're learning to move again and all that kind of thing. So what are some of the main lessons you've learned from that, if you don't mind sharing them kind of quickly? And also, is there anything that people can do if they're listening to this and they think, right, that's it, I need to get back into my body so I can start trusting and managing these instincts a little bit more?
Okay. So the movement practices, everything we do is helping people learn to speak what I call their embodied language, which is your body's own unique language of the senses. Because, you know, there's all kind of maps that people will give folks. Well, if you feel it in your belly, it's related to this and it means that. Not necessarily true for all people. Yeah. And the way I actually learned that, many years ago, I created this yes, no, truth practice because I have seen this work for many years. If you know what a yes feels like in your body, what a no feels like in your body, and when your body's telling you that you're in the presence of truth or something that's like significant or important for you to pay attention to, if that's all you know, those three signals, you're good. You can navigate a lot of stuff. But it doesn't work the same way for everybody. Again, depending on the season or cycle of your life, what's going on, those things really can fluctuate. And I geek out. I don't know. Have you heard of human design? Are you into human design at all?
I've heard of it, but I'm not into it, to be honest.
I don't need to go deep into it. But, in human design, one of the things I like about it is they call it your authority. And this is basically how your body responds to like instinct and impulse and connects to intuition or like gets to a place of knowing. And so some people have like what's called a sacral authority. Those are the people who should be listening to their gut. Because that's like another like nebulous phrase that people will throw around, like listen to your gut. Not everyone's gut is the thing that's actually communicating with them. Right? I'm what's called emotional authority, which means I need to sleep on things because I will have like really high highs or really low lows as I'm like contemplating stuff. And so I need to wait till I get back to a neutral spot to check in for like what the real intuition is, you know? So, different people, it's going to be different ways. So that's why I say you got to learn how's your body speaking to you. And then, beyond that, for folks who are more into like the psychic senses, for every physical sense we have, there is a psychic sense called like a clair, like clairaudient, clairvoyant, those things that go with it. And to learn how to work with those too is just going to give you more access to more intuitive, information, wisdom, whatever you want to call it, guidance.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I guess what you're saying is it's just about listening to your body in the language that your body speaks to you. It is different for everybody.
Big time.
Like, yeah, That's awesome.
Yeah.
What about receptivity? Like, how does that feed into all this?
So, manifesting is a real popular word out there. It's been proliferated by The Secret back in the day, which I think that came out in like the early 2000s, right? And so when we talk about receptivity, I like to take a bit more of a spiritually mature approach and go, all right, let's not treat the universe like Santa Claus or an ATM, right? And let's also, and receptivity actually prepares us for getting into wild dreaming and desire because, as you were mentioning, the ego earlier, we have ego desires and we have soul's desires. In every ego desire is a seedling of a like soul's desire, of a more like genuine, authentic, like aligned desire. So receptivity is also about like peeling back the conditioning around what's really for you and what's not.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people's like worthiness issues, if you deconstruct this, one of the reasons why people don't feel worthy is because they're constantly chasing things that actually aren't aligned for them. And then when they're not getting them, they're like, what's wrong with me? And it's like, nothing's wrong with you. It's just the wrong shit.
Yeah. Like, I see this a lot. Like, for example, a lot of people might chase like a fancy sports car or like a big mansion or something, not because they really want one, but because it's a way of compensating for their underlying shame and trauma maybe that they're feeling and the ego that they've created because of that. And so ultimately they're filtering their desires through ego rather than through their actual true intentions. And so when they're doing that, obviously whatever they're putting out into life is totally putting out the wrong signals. They may end up getting that thing, whatever it is, like the Lamborghini or whatever, but it'll probably ruin their life and it won't last very long. And if they don't get it and they start driving themselves mad saying, the law of attraction or whatever doesn't work, then it's because of the underlying shame and doubt and the misalignment. This is why I say you need to work on the ego and the acceptance first before you go out into life and try and design anything with it. So is that what you're talking about with receptivity? It's just basically getting to that point where your relationship with yourself is based on a sense of wholeness, I guess, deep connection to your true intentions and desires. And then you're putting that out there, and then the boomerangs that you're throwing out are bringing back things that you actually want instead of whatever you bring because of ego distortion. Yeah.
Because it's really about like getting to know yourself. Who are you? How are you built? What are your actual values and priorities? Yeah. And aligning with those things. And I'll give you an example. Like, I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Miami Beach. I have no desire to own a home. I drive a little Mini Cooper. It's cute, right? It's nicer than some cars. Certainly not as nice as a lot of things. Like, I'm not a very materialistic person. There are some things I really do like to have, nice things. But a lot of things I do not care about. I'm not into fashion. I don't like, there's just stuff. So I don't even bother distracting myself with that, Yeah. Nor do I spend my time consuming or like viewing or allowing myself to be influenced by people who are really into that stuff, because no one's mind is completely unsusceptible to stuff like that, right? If you expose yourself enough to anything, you'll start thinking you need it. Yeah. And that's not the case. So there's some self-discipline here, some self-knowledge and awareness here, and what's real for you. And sometimes we get there by trial and error. Like you said, you got the Lamborghini and then you're like, damn, my life isn't better. I don't feel a way I thought I was going to feel. And you're like, it wasn't about the damn Lamborghini.
Yeah. I think this comes back to what you were saying about social conditioning. Like, a lot of the time, people, they just think that they want things because like it's what you're supposed to want. And so obviously if you go chasing that and it's totally misaligned with like who you really are, then it's either not going to happen or you're going to feel miserable when you do get it. I've got a quick question about what we're saying about law of attraction. What do you think about the idea that, I suppose there's two parts to this question. So the first part is, if something is real, then you're gonna get it, basically. If you trust and believe and you keep moving forward and taking the actions, that's another thing that people forget. You have to take the inspired actions to get where you're going.
Seriously.
Yeah. But then there's another thing that I've noticed, and it's you set certain goals for yourself, but you can remain outcome independent in the way that you approach them. Because, okay, say you do some soul searching and you realize, right, I really need this Lamborghini, not because of desire, but because of my intention to really express like my freedom and to like just, feel the engine roaring, all that stuff. So it is real in the sense that it's an expression of something that's already real in you. But then the outcome independence element is you don't actually need to bring in the Lamborghini or whatever it is, because you're already exactly where you need to be. Like, you're grateful for what you've got, you feel good, you're connected to your being, you're flowing with life and all that kind of stuff. But you still want to bring things into your life as a kind of deeper expression of who you are, something like that. Have you got any thoughts about that? Because for me, if I can get to that place where I'm already totally chill and I just kind of flow towards these things that I want, taking action again, that's when things really work out. And I think there's something there about the receptivity thing, maybe.
So this really points us to that conversation about ego desires versus soul desires, right?
Yeah.
And, regardless of assigning which is which, whenever you have like a really strong, intense desire, I always teach people to like just inquire a little bit, sit with it and go and just like keep asking, like a little 2-year-old who goes, why? Like, keep asking yourself, well, why that thing? What does this actually represent? And I have a great personal example. 2013, I was walking on the beach. I was in Malibu, California, and I was looking at all these like multi-million-dollar beach houses on the beach. And at the time I was like, this is my biggest goal in life. I want to own one of like a home like this on a beach like this, maybe here, maybe somewhere else, right? And for years, I held that vision literally up until last year. So for a decade. And where I live in Miami Beach, I'm right on Biscayne Bay, and I paddleboard here among the all the different islands here in Miami Beach all the time. There's, all these like, major celebrities, athletes, whatever, business moguls live on these islands. And I paddleboard through and I look into their backyards and whatever. And I'm like, for such a long time, this was my biggest dream, to own like a home like this. And I realized last year, I'm like, it's always just been a symbol, right? Because when I built my School of Sacred Embodiment, because what I wanted in the home was a place where I could like invite people and host people and be like a safe, comfortable place for people to come and feel like they could be themselves and like whatever. And I'm like, oh, that's my school that I built. Like,
wow.
School was the dream house. This is the place with all the different rooms, right? All the different programs and frameworks and offerings and things that we have. People can literally come home to themselves in this school, this dream house that I have built, over the last 10 years. I'm like, it wasn't about a damn house at all. Because every time I think about what it would take to actually own, let alone maintain a house like that, I don't want to do any of that.
Yeah, that's an awesome example. It shows, I guess, this kind of classic thing. It's not about what you want. It's about the underlying values and all that kind of stuff behind it. And
1,000%.
Yeah, if you hold on to that stuff, then because it is real for you, then and you keep moving forward with the action again, then you stand a very high chance of kind of getting there and making it happen. And that is receptivity. That's awesome. Have we got time to blast through the final 4 things?
Yeah, because we already did. We just did desire, so there's really only 3. So let me tell you, wild dreaming, and actually I gave a TEDx talk in December where I talked about this. So at the end of the show, I'll give you, it's the untameyourself.com/links. Anything I'm ever doing is going to be at that link, and people could watch the TEDx talk, learn about wild dreaming. But essentially, when I talk about wild dreaming, I'm not even talking about goal setting. I'm talking about a practice where as adults who have been so programmed, so conditioned, all that stuff, we reconnect in with that childlike wonder and awe, that ability to unreasonably dream about things that just expands and stretches the imagination. And people who were more into like neurobiology and neuroscience and stuff like that, they could better explain than I could how you like create and open new neural pathways and stuff like that. But even allowing yourself to just imagine things that are unreasonable or just fun. Like, for example, a woman in my community, I love this. She's like, my biggest wild dream would be to have like a closet I could walk into that I step in and I step out on the other side and I'm like fully dressed and ready to go to work. Like, I hate getting ready in the morning. This would be my biggest dream. And even though, like, honestly, that's probably not happening in our lifetime, if ever, but allowing herself to connect with that wild dream illuminated the thing, motivating it, which is that I hate getting ready in the morning. So what she can do is maybe simplify or create a different process for getting ready in the morning.
Yeah.
Right? So our wild dreams just expand our imagination so that other solutions, other ideas, perhaps, other desires even can come to the surface.
Yeah. That's awesome, because ultimately what it's doing, it's circumventing all of that, the limitations of social programming and conditioning we were talking about. And then you can put yourself back into, I guess, the flow, so to speak, because you're not forcing everything through those perceived limitations which don't even exist.
And it's fun. right? And a lot of this like self-help, personal development, coaching, healing, whatever, trauma work is not fun. It's like fucking miserable. So when you have a practice that you let be a little fun sometimes, what a relief.
Yeah. Like it should be fun. Like ultimately this process of healing is just the process of growing more real and putting yourself into all of the good things about life, like joy ultimately and peace and all.
Joy. We're built for a lot of joy that a lot of us are just like not allowing or leaving space for. So we already talked about desire. When I talk about love, one of the most common but most ambiguous phrases in the world, right? When we talk about it in the School of Sacred Embodiment, I'm talking honestly about becoming an exquisite instrument and channel for divine love to flow through, right? And maybe again, for some people who aren't mystically oriented, it could just be love. It could just be the force of love. It means making your relationship with yourself one of your life's most passionate love affairs, right? Because we know how important self-love is. And then once you learn how to treat yourself better, you can be like, oh, of course, everyone deserves this.
Yeah.
Like everyone should be treated well. And so love is just really a practice in seeing how beautiful life, people, how unique life, people, all kinds of things are. So we could just be more kind, compassionate, generous, gentle people.
Yeah. You know what? I think finishing with love kind of brings us full circle, because if you think about it, all of that social conditioning and all of that programming and blah, 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 it stops us from just accepting who we are and what life is. And that takes us out of the natural flow that we're all engaged in, is that we hold ourselves back with that programming, etc. The natural flow towards wholeness. And so ultimately, the way that I look at it is it's about acceptance. I always say love and acceptance are the same thing. And if you really love yourself, really accept yourself, and then you accept life as well, and you can move in this wild way that we've been talking about. The opposite of being wild basically is not loving yourself, because of social programming and bullshit and fragmentation that causes you to hold back and hesitate in life. So that's awesome. So we basically just blasted through that, but we've covered loads in 35 minutes. If you're going to sum this up, if that's possible, how would you do it? And can you let people know and remind people where they can find you and all that kind of stuff, and in particular the TED Talk you're on about?
So we did blast through it, but there's one more part of the framework, which is actually the last thing, which is the summary, which is truth, which brings us back full circle, because that's what we talked about in the beginning anyway. We each have our own truths. They're universal truths. They're always, ever evolving and emerging truths in our lives, in the world, the reality of how things are, how we want them to be, and all that stuff. So all of these things just help people connect and relate to and move towards just a more genuine relationship to all that. So the link that people can go to find anything that we talked about or that I'm ever doing is my website is untameyourself.com. And the link is untameyourself.com/links. So I have a little page where, like the Linktree thing that people use on their Instagram, but I just made it on my website instead of using someone else's platform.
Brilliant. Well, I'll share that in the show notes. Elizabeth, thank you for this. Like, the energy's been super cool. So I appreciate that. Yeah. And I love your framework as well. That's awesome. So yeah.
Thank you. Great questions. I had fun.